obeying a spectacular, recuperated idea of situation.
I think that when people see the Situationists critique the spectacle, and they use the word recuperation, which is kind of like co-option, more or less the same thing, people are getting an oversimplified view of what's going on here. Like, the critique of the spectacle is a critique of a sort of social process that's going on, or social situation, where we can see a predominant tendency for people to do this. It doesn't mean that you should never be in a position like where one person's talking to the other, or you should never put out a leaflet because somebody has to look at the leaflet and so it's a spectacle or something. And being recuperated or co-opted, again, this was mentioned by one or two other people too. That is a long-term concern, but frankly, I don't worry about it if the movement is vibrant. Then I don't care if politicians come in and try to get their picture taken at an Occupy or something. You know, the point is to put them on the defensive. And I'm not if the participation is vital enough, radical new things will happen. And those things will happen so rapidly that nobody can co-opt them because they're chain reactions going on. And if somebody does try to come in with some lame thing like to sell Occupy brand something or other, you know, people are just going to laugh at it. That's not co-option. That's just some little silly thing, you know, somebody's trying to make a buck. Co-option would be, for example, if the entire or a large part of the Occupy movement decides to work for Obama, say. I mean, it's conceivable. I mean, if you saw something like that, you could say, well, here they started out, but they've gotten dragged back into the deal. To me, co-option is not Occupy movements are doing all this thing, and some participants in Occupy movements go and vote for Obama. That's of no significance whatsoever. And I'm not worried about that. What I'm concerned about is that whatever the Occupies are, they do their own, you know, they maintain their autonomy, they keep experimenting. And when they're doing that, this other stuff will take care of itself as far as I'm concerned. Yes?
So I'm interested in this idea of total self-management. I'd like to go further into that and what was the Situationist idea of how that would really happen, because people are so used to being managed. The factory workers in France, they didn't know what to do. They were so used to being managed. What do we do now? We can't manage ourselves. So how do you go about doing that? Also, too, there's this thing in the Occupy Oakland, that this shift, and for me the shift kind of last week was, I felt sort of managed. I didn't know where I was going to be led to. I didn't know I was going to be led to a building that we didn't have enough people to really actually take over, but just create a spectacle in front of. And so it was kind of this ugly shift for me, and like I didn't feel like, you know, there was much management I could do once I was in front of all that tear gas. So these kinds of things are total self-management. I don't know, is this possible?
Yep.
What do we do as managed beings?
Yeah. No, that's a very good point. To start with your last thing, that's a good test. If you're in a situation and you say, hey, I don't know what I'm doing here. Somebody else is telling me what to do. There may be occasional times like, okay, we're going to keep something secret for blah, blah, blah. But in general, that's not a healthy situation. It's like somebody else made a decision, and then you later find maybe it was a bad decision and you're arrested for something you weren't planning, or whatever. To go to your first question about self-management, there are a few articles in here. There's one called, in French, the term is, they use autogestion, but it's, they use the term generalized, but I think total. Generalized just means that it's spread everywhere, universalized, as opposed to like self-managing one factory or one company or one town or something. So they have some discussions of that, and also discussions of workers' councils, the history of those in Spanish Revolution in Russia, Hungary, 1956, where they get a little hint of that. And then one of the Situationists later, after the Situationist group split up, wrote a little book called From Wildcat Strike to Total Self-Management. And it goes through, I think it has 3 chapters, and the first chapter is sort of general things about what's wrong with society and reactions against it. And the second chapter is wildcat strikes, and how can they be organized or instigated and so on. In other words, a strike without the unions managing it. And the third chapter is what kind of society do we want, like if we get to a self-managed society. And to plug my own thing, I have the first text in Public Secrets is called The Joy of Revolution. And it's my take on all these things that have been talked about here, and a lot more: electoral politics and reformism and insurrections and, so on. And the first 3 chapters are about tactics, strategies in the situation we find ourselves in. And the last chapter is about what if we won? What would society be like? And so there's about 20 pages there where I say, okay, we wouldn't use money, then how would we do blah, blah, blah? What would we do if somebody raped somebody? What would we do if, what kind of technology would we do? All these issues that people raise, I go into how people could organize them. And the idea is that the total society is self-managed on all levels. So you might want to look into that. Yes?
I have a couple of questions, actually. One of them is, what was the experience of the Situationists in '68 with any kind of agent provocateurs? And my other question is that after the fact, my history of France is pretty poor. What was happening there? Was there a right-wing backlash? Was there that kind of thing? What happened after the uprising as far as the country did it go swing to the right, like I'm afraid we could have happen?
Yeah, the first question, provocateurs, I don't recall hearing much about that. I think the whole thing happened so fast that it was beyond provocateurs. And that's another thing to bear in mind, even though the Occupy movement is rather different, and we're not in a mode of holding the country at a standstill or something. If enough things are going on, it's hard for provocateurs to get a grip. But if things kind of narrow down where you've just got an event or something, then it's child's play for a few provocateurs to get in and shift it over a little bit or say something and adjust it so that it's set up, and it just takes one provocateur to throw the proverbial bottle that starts the, whatever it may be. But in France, that was kind of irrelevant, because during the street fights, they actually were fighting. So what is a provocateur going to do there? And when the fights are over, they stopped fighting. There were no other fights after that. Like once the Occupy things there, that was so overwhelming that anybody proposing, let's go out and do this, would have been so obvious a provocateur or idiot that nobody would have paid any attention. As far as what happened afterwards, no, there wasn't a backlash. One of the amazing things about May '68 is that the Situationists noted is that probably in all of history had probably never been such a massive revolt that did not succeed but did not get crushed. In other words, after it was over, there were a few people arrested and they were all released, and when they tried to arrest a few other people, there were threats of, and they did nothing. And that was despite the fact that the buildings had been totally illegally occupied all over the place. Yes?
I have a two-part question. Going back to the situation with the Situationists making that proposal to occupy the factories and so forth.
I was wondering about the circumstances of what was called the working class at that time. What sort of benefits do they have? Like, in our situation now, I think those who are under unions, and certainly some unions, they are in a much financially better situation than the majority of Americans, for one. The second part of the question refers to that idea of aligning with this idea of the workers, which I was wondering, did the Situationists also inherit, I guess, maybe the Hegelian Marxist idea of this universal class arising from the contradictions within capitalism and because of their alienation, et cetera, come into this class that will naturally, come into contradiction with capitalism. I mean, I don't think that's, I don't agree with that per se. I mean, very few people in our condition self-identify purely as being a worker. Maybe it's more of an excluded case. Was it?
That's a complicated issue. The Situationists were largely Marxist. If you go, so that's kind of their basic thing. Although they had an anti-state, and in this context, they definitely had the idea, like, here's where the leverage is. Here's where the power lies. You have these masses of workers, and the workers are ones who can occupy the factories. If you're not in there, you can't occupy. You can go occupy a building, but it's not the same thing. The workers occupying factories can potentially start them up again. The ones that are worth starting up again, reoriented to producing things that are worth producing, so they definitely thought that. I think it's sufficient without going into did they think of Hegel's this or that they thought that as a practical purpose they want a popular revolution that involves everybody, and that one of the sort of mechanical things that you can't bypass there is what about all these workers? They're the ones who. If you're going to reorient the society, who's going to be driving the trains or the trucking food in from the countryside or doing whatever else? And so they would focus on that, and that, of course, has all these other ramifications. Like by doing that, you're challenging capitalism and so on. But I think it's best to leave it at that and not say, did they think exactly like...
My question was, do you know what the conditions of those workers were at that time? Per se, why they, I'm saying, why they didn't align as much, why,
the economy was running fine. I mean, nobody, before this was happening, of course, as the Situationists poked fun at certain kinds of leftists, of course, after May 68, certain leftist groups were saying, aha, yes, here, we can see back in December 1967, there was a downturn of, they're acting as if these things that used to be undeniable, like the Great Depression, they're saying, oh, we can see in these tables over here that there was a little dip, and I guess that accounts for, but it actually had nothing to do with the economy, and it had nothing to do with the government either. There wasn't any Vietnam War or anything going on that they were working on. Yes?
I have a question. My understanding is that de Gaulle disappeared for a few days, and he met with people in NATO, and there was very serious possibility that the U.S. was going to engage militarily in occupying, so to speak, through NATO. And I mention that because there's fear, and I think legitimate fear, that Obama, as well as whoever the Republicans put up, will do something massively repressive here, as was done in '68 here, in terms of occupying cities with National Guard and troops. Now, at the same time, and this is my question, there is, I'm sorry, hold on, there's a serious problem of political paranoia that disguises itself in terms of what could be used for provocative behavior, the black bloc, for instance. There is no reason for people to cover their faces. And in fact, when they do that, that sets us all up to be terrorized by provocateurs. So they have to be engaged. And just finally, I want to know if there's anything you're familiar with, and I'm sorry I went over my 15 seconds. If there's anything about engaging mental health people, who've got some mental health skills to engage. Now, there is going to be, I'll mention there's going to be an intervention on the part of Food Not Bombs to get some mental health training. Go ahead.
Yeah.
We end traditionally at 12:30, and there's another group coming in here at 1, so that's going to have to be the last question. For anybody who came in late, if we ask you to please help us keep the lights on, so if you didn't, or if you did, you want to do it again, you can do it again. Good.
Yeah, we
Anyway,
want to keep the place occupied.
Next week, the Beehive Collective is going to be here. They're very cool. They bring in a big mural. It's very neat stuff. You want to come?
Bob, if it's half an hour, why the rush?
Because they're going to come in and set up. I can give you another 10, 15 minutes. If
Yeah,
you want.
why don't we do that? We still got pretty much a full
Okay,
house
we'll
here.
go to, and they're not here yet. We'll go to quarter 1.
Fine.
Believe me,
What
if we
was
can
your
go.
last comment? You were going to say something else.
I don't remember.
I was just teasing. Give Ken the time.
I was just teasing.
Yeah, I was going to read a little thing here, but maybe in the interest of brevity, okay. This is a Situationist article by Guy Debord, actually, about May 68, and he's looking back and on what might have happened. He's described what did happen. And this maybe gives you a little flavor. He says, if in a single large factory between May 16th and May 30th, a General Assembly had constituted itself as a council, in other words, like a workers' council, in a factory, holding all powers of decision and execution, in other words, expelling the bureaucrats, in other words, saying union bureaucrats out, organizing its self-defense, and calling on the strikers of all the enterprises to link up with it. So you're envisioning in one factory doing this. This qualitative step could have immediately brought the movement to the ultimate showdown, to the final struggle, whose general outlines have all been historically traced by this movement. What he means is that he's looking back to Spain in 1917 and all these other times where things kind of came to this thing where it's make it or break it. A very large number of enterprises would have followed the course thus discovered. This factory could immediately have taken the place of the dubious and in every sense eccentric Sorbonne of the first days. That's two senses of the word eccentric, is eccentric and off-centered. Like it was kind of ironic that the Sorbonne was the center of this working class movement. Of the first days, and have become the real center of the occupations movement. Genuine delegates, as opposed to representatives, that is, people who are mandated and recallable. Genuine delegates from the numerous councils that had already virtually existed in some of the occupied buildings, and from all the councils that could have imposed themselves in all the branches of industry, would have rallied around this base. Such an assembly could then have proclaimed the expropriation of all capital, including state capital, announced that all the country's means of production were henceforth the collective property of the proletariat organized in direct democracy, and appealed directly, by finally seizing some of the telecommunications facilities, for example, to the workers of the entire world to support this revolution. Some people will say that such a hypothesis is utopian. We answer, it is precisely because the occupations movement was objectively, at several moments, only an hour away from such a result, that it spread such terror, visible to everyone at the time in the impotence of the state and the panic of the so-called Communist Party, and since then in the conspiracy of silence concerning its gravity. In such an eventuality, civil war would naturally have been inevitable. If armed confrontation had no longer hinged on what the government feared or pretended to fear concerning the supposed evil designs of the so-called Communist Party, but had actually faced the consolidation of a direct industrial-based proletarian power, then armed counter-revolution would certainly have been launched immediately, but it would not have been certain of winning. Some of the troops would obviously have mutinied. The workers would have figured out how to get weapons, and they would certainly not have built any more barricades. A good form of political expression at the beginning of the movement, but obviously ridiculous strategically. Foreign intervention would have inevitably followed, probably beginning with the NATO forces, but with the direct or indirect support of the Warsaw Pact, i.e. East Europe. But then everything would once again have hinged on the European proletariat. Double or nothing. Yes?
I have a question about the relationship of theory and practice and how you put theory into practice. If I understand the presentation, the situationalists are sort of non-hierarchy and that top-down leadership and sort of participatory. And I think about that, how we could put that in practice into our meetings here at the library. Usually our meetings, and this is an exception, we sit around in a circle. We have a single person that puts forth ideas, but then after that we have dialogue. Today we've had, I feel like I'm back in school with the professor quoting his books, and you got 15 minutes to ask the question, and then seconds, and then the guru tells us what the truth is. How would you put situationalist practice into this meeting?
Well, let's take this meeting for example, and you have a very good point there. As I said, I don't, for a long time, I did
things like this. I mean, for decades, when people would say, will you come and talk here, or can I interview you, or something, I would say, no. I've written these things, you can see what I have to say, or what the things I've translated are. But after a little while, I thought, well, it's not necessary to be quite so extreme. And I was invited to, they said, oh, we'd like to hear what you have to say about such and such a few years ago. And so I've been experimenting with how that works. I don't actually like too much the mode of lecturer, and that's why I made my talk rather short. And I do like the interchange. But the fact is, like, those meetings that you're describing are how I've taken part in countless ones. And that's kind of the norm. I think that's fine. And that's, if you're in a group deciding what you're going to do or things like that, that makes sense. In this particular case, the event is labeled, Ken Knabb is going to talk about da-da-da. Maybe some of you don't know, and so you want to hear, what did the Situationists say about this, or something. So in that, for an hour or two, we're in that mode, and nobody has to stay. Nobody has to come here if they didn't want to be in that mode. So, I mean, I go to hear concerts, and I don't complain that I can't be on stage. Occasionally, I go to hear somebody talk. So,
The value of dialogue, what's your feeling about that?
well, are we not having dialogue right now? Of some sort, maybe not the kind you're talking about.
Yeah, it's not, I think we really do have like an exchange of ideas here. We have a one-way transmittal.
What's the question?
And so the question is,
No,
It's-
not you.
no.
Him saying to somebody, what's the question?
Someone
is
barking out, what's the
perfect
question?
example
When my
of
friend
non-dialogue.
went a minute and 10 seconds, and other people did likewise, and I don't begrudge him for that.
This issue will be discussed in our planning meeting in 15 minutes, so please.
but the issue is fine, and I'm glad you brought it up.
This is a special circumstance, and there might be some other occasion where you have something, or somebody else here does. So just bear in mind what's going on. I mean, if I was here every week and you were my loyal followers coming to hear, then you would start to say, hey, this is kind of, most of you I've never even seen before, and it's, it's just an interaction.
Can you pass that around again? Can you
Yes,
do
sir.
it again for other people that come?
Yeah. What I'd like to ask, maybe if we're wrapping up, this might be a good wrap-up question. One of the reasons that the woman may have felt that she was being managed is because in Occupy Oakland, we've reached a point where too few people are unaccountably and unreviewably making too large a decision, or too critical a decision. And people can act perhaps foolishly, but acting foolishly in a way to destroy the movement is indeed, criticizable. And we've reached a point in the movement where people can't be critical without being shouted down or accused of not being down for the revolution and all that kind of nonsense. So my question for you is, what would you say about this debate about the diversity of tactics, which is a code word, of course, for vandalism, versus diversity of people, because we can't have both and build a broad-based movement?
It's a good question, but I'm going to pass on it, because I think thousands of people are discussing the very thing. I don't know that I have anything to...
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to tell you what you already know. The Commons, called the Electoral Arena, it's stolen from us. It never was ours. And so to this end, I urge you, which to the spiel, you might have heard it about a dozen times, register Peace and Freedom Party to maintain the socialist discussion on the ballot. It's a way, it's a place to do some action. The Peace and Freedom Party is revolutionary, okay? It cannot get what...
what was your question again?
I'm not questioning. I'm making an announcement behind what he's saying. And the fact that people will not engage and take over that commons is denying the use of a place to do this kind of activity.
I think they're aware of this possibility. So,
within this
excuse me. So to wind this up, I thank you again for coming, and most of you for staying here. And I'm going, as I mentioned earlier, I have a email list you're welcome to sign, and I have books for sale, free leaflets. So if we can try to do this within the next 5 to 10 minutes so we can get ready for that next event.
So Ken, is there a chance to have a more considered dialogue about some of these issues?
Maybe, but I don't want to talk about